Good night, this is Fumi Sleepy Time Stories. Tonight's bedtime story is about to begin.
A long time ago, beside a forest, there lived a poor family. A woodcutter, his wife, and their 2 children. The son was named Hansel, and the daughter was named Gretel. One night, as their food supply dwindled, the woodcutter sat on his chair, sighing deeply. His wife asked, "What's wrong?" The woodcutter hesitated before replying, "We don't have enough food for everyone." "Then tomorrow morning, take the children deep into the forest. Give them each a small piece of bread, then leave them there quietly. If they don't know the way home, we won't have to worry about not having enough to eat," his wife suggested. At first, the woodcutter couldn't bear to abandon his children and protested, but his second wife was too dominant and relentless, so he had no choice but to agree. The 2 children, unable to sleep due to hunger, overheard their stepmother and father's conversation. Gretel began to cry sadly and said to Hansel, "We're going to be abandoned." "Hush, Gretel." Hansel comforted her. "Don't worry, I'll think of something." That night, after the adults had fallen asleep, Hansel sneaked outside. He picked up many small stones that glowed under the moonlight, and filled his coat pockets with them. Then he returned and told Gretel, "Don't worry, dear sister, God will be with us." At dawn the next day, their stepmother woke them up. "Get up, you lazy children," she shouted. "We're going into the forest to chop wood." She gave each of them a small piece of bread. "This is your lunch. Don't eat it too soon, because there's nothing more." Gretel took the bread and hid it under her apron. As Hansel's pockets were already full of white stones, as they walked, Hansel kept pausing and looking back toward home. His father noticed and asked, "Hansel, what are you looking at?" "Oh, Father," Hansel replied, "I see my little white cat sitting on the roof, watching me." "That's not your cat," the stepmother said. "That's the morning sunlight reflecting on the chimney." But Hansel wasn't really looking at a cat. He was secretly dropping white stones one by one along the path. When they reached the deepest part of the forest, their father said, "Children, gather some firewood. I'll make a fire to keep you warm." Hansel and Gretel collected many dry twigs. Once the fire was burning, their stepmother said, "Stay here and wait. We're going to chop wood. Once we're done, we'll come back for you." The children waited obediently. At noon, they ate their small pieces of bread. Hearing the sound of wood being chopped, they believed their parents were nearby. But in reality, it wasn't chopping at all. It was just a dry branch tied to a tree. Knocking against the trunk in the wind, they waited for a long, long time and eventually fell asleep. When they woke up, it was pitch dark. Gretel cried in fear, "We can't go home." "Don't worry," Hansel reassured her. "Once the moon rises, we can find our way back." When the moon shone brightly, Hansel took Gretel's hand and followed the glowing white stones back home. They walked all night and finally arrived at dawn. Their stepmother opened the door. Seeing them, she said, "Where have you been? We were so worried." Their father, filled with guilt, felt relieved upon seeing them. Some time passed, and once again, their stepmother told her husband, "Sigh, we've run out of food again. We must get rid of the children, or we'll all starve. This time, take them even deeper into the forest." This time, the husband silently agreed. Hansel heard everything. That night, when his parents fell asleep, he wanted to gather stones like before. But his stepmother had locked the door. He thought of another plan and comforted Gretel. "Don't cry, Gretel. Don't worry, God will help us." The next morning, their stepmother gave them each a piece of bread, even smaller than before. On the way to the forest, Hansel secretly crumbled his bread in his pocket and dropped crumbs along the path. "Hansel, what are you doing?" his father asked when he noticed him stopping frequently. "I'm looking at my little dove, sitting on the roof, saying goodbye to me," Hansel said. "You fool," his stepmother scolded. "That's just the morning sunlight on the rooftop." They walked for a long time until they reached an unfamiliar forest. As before, they built a fire and were told to wait. At noon, Gretel shared her bread with Hansel, since he had scattered his along the way. The children waited until they fell asleep again. When they woke up, it was dark once more. Hansel comforted Gretel. "When the moon comes out, we'll follow the breadcrumb trail home." But when the moon rose, they found nothing. The crumbs had been eaten by birds. Though anxious, Hansel reassured Gretel, "We'll find a way home." They wandered through the forest, lost and hungry, until they suddenly smelled something delicious. Following the scent, they discovered a small house. The house's walls were made of soft bread. Its roof was thick with cream, and its windows were crisp sugar panes. Candies and pastries decorated the walls, emitting a sweet aroma. Starving, the children began to eat. Suddenly, a voice called from inside, "Who is nibbling on my house?" The chocolate door creaked open, and an old woman with a cane stepped out. Hansel and Gretel stood frozen in fear. "Oh, you must be hungry." The woman said kindly, "Come in, no one will harm you." She gave them a delicious meal and let them sleep in soft beds. Hansel and Gretel had never been treated so well and thought they had met an angel. But the woman was actually a wicked witch who lured children with her candy house. She was nearly blind, but had a keen sense of smell, and she loved eating children. The next morning, the witch showed her true nature. She locked Hansel in a small room and ordered Gretel, "Get up, lazy girl. Cook something delicious for your brother. I'll fatten him up and eat him." Though heartbroken, Gretel had no choice but to obey. Hansel feasted daily, while Gretel survived on dry bread every day. The witch demanded, "Hansel, stick out your finger so I can check if you've grown fat." But Hansel tricked her by sticking out a little bone instead. The nearly blind witch felt the bone and wondered why he wasn't getting fatter. After some time, she lost patience. "Enough," she roared. "Gretel, fetch water. Fat or thin, I'll eat him tomorrow." While the witch was away, Gretel secretly ran to the small room store and told her brother everything she had overheard. Then they began to discuss their escape plan. Hansel said, "Steal her wand and the flute in her room. That way, even if she chases us, we won't have to fear her." After much effort, Gretel managed to steal both the wand and the flute. Then the two children fled. When the witch returned, she immediately noticed the children were gone. Enraged, she put on her boots that allowed her to take great strides. Soon, she was closing in on Hansel and Gretel. As the witch was about to catch them, Gretel used the wand to turn Hansel into a lake and herself into a little swan, swimming within it. When the witch arrived at the lake and did not see the siblings, she left in frustration. Once the witch was gone, Gretel used the wand to restore them to their original forms, and they continued their journey. As night fell, the witch caught up to them again. This time, Gretel transformed herself into a rose and Hansel into a flutist standing beside it. "Flutist," the witch said, "may I pick that beautiful rose?" "Oh, of course," Hansel replied cheerfully, just as the witch, recognizing the rose by its scent, stepped forward. Hansel took out the flute and played a tune. The flute was enchanted. Whoever heard its sound would be forced to dance uncontrollably. As Hansel played, the witch spun and twirled, unable to stop, until she was flung far, far away. Gretel returned to her original form, and the siblings continued their journey home. After traveling for a long while, Gretel was exhausted. So, they found a hollow tree to rest in. While they slept, the witch caught up to them once again. She discovered the siblings and retrieved her wand without hesitation. She seized Hansel and Gretel and dragged them back to her home. When Hansel awoke, he found himself locked in the small room once more, while Gretel was tied up outside the door. As soon as the witch saw that Gretel was awake, she sneered viciously. "You will stoke the fire soon. I'm going to cook your brother and eat him. Don't try any tricks, or you'll end up as beast food yourself." Tears welled in Gretel's eyes, but she obediently went to prepare the firewood. While the witch was distracted, she secretly ran to the small room and told her brother of the witch's plan. After listening, Hansel whispered that he had a plan. He told Gretel to do as she was told and build the fire, so the witch would lower her guard. When the witch was ready to cook, she dragged Hansel out of the room. At that moment, Hansel suddenly shouted, "Now!" Together, Hansel and Gretel shoved the witch into the burning oven and slammed the door shut. The witch's screams echoed through the small house, but soon all fell silent. After confirming the witch was truly gone, Hansel and Gretel gathered all the gold, silver, and food the witch had hoarded. They loaded everything onto a cart and set off for home. When they arrived, they knocked on the door, and their father opened it. As it turned out, after abandoning his children in the forest, the woodcutter still found there wasn't enough food. So he had driven his wife away as well. From that day forward, the three of them lived happily ever after.